Let's go back in time to the 90s, a time when rock stars were still allowed to be rock stars, and Oasis were the last to truly embody that spirit. Now in the 90s, the entire idea of being a rock star was about living on edge. It wasn't about playing it safe or curating your image every second. It was about letting the chaos unfold, letting your personality shine on stage, and dealing with the consequences later. That was Oasis. Liam Gallagher with his swagger, the cocky interviews, the impossible to ignore presence, was the embodiment of the rock star stereotype, the bad boy who didn't care what everyone thought. But it wasn't just about being brash for the sake of it. There was a realness to his approach that resonated with fans. He was raw, unfiltered, and unapologetic. That combination made him larger than life. But it wasn't just about Liam. Noel Gallagher, the quieter genius behind the songs, was the perfect counterbalance to his brother's brashness. Noel had his moments of attitude, but his true genius was in his music. He didn't just write great songs, he wrote timeless ones. Together, the Gallaghers were an unstoppable force that captured the tension and drama of their era. But here's the thing, in the 90s, rock and roll wasn't just a genre, it was a lifestyle. There was a freedom that came with being a rock star. And in Oasis's case, they didn't have to worry about curating their public persona or thinking about how their next tweet would be perceived. They were allowed to be raw, honest, and sometimes reckless. But today, that kind of behaviour would likely be seen as irresponsible or toxic. Bands today are expected to toe the line much more carefully, avoiding controversy or risk. This kind of free-spirited chaos is rare in the music scene now, and that's exactly why Oasis felt like last of their kind. But in today's era, that level of unpredictability and arrogance would probably be scrutinised to death, but back then it felt like a badge of honour. Now let's take a look into how the internet and camera phones changed the game. I think we all remember a time before social media ruled everything, a time when an artist's personal life could be a bit more private and their music was the focus, not their every move. Can you picture Liam Gallagher's every drunken rant or fight with Noel being recorded on an iPhone and shared on Instagram within seconds? That's the kind of thing that made Oasis seem larger than life. They were always unpredictable and sometimes even out of control, but at the same time, they thrived in that unpredictability. Think about the power of tabloids back then. The media would spread stories about Oasis like wildfire, but there was still an element of mystery. There was only a handful of people who could document Oasis's behaviour, the press and photographers, who could catch them at just the right moment. But now, everyone's got a camera, and the power is in the hands of the fans. Imagine if Noel and Liam had to deal with the pressures of a public Twitter or Instagram. Their every squabble, every drunken moment would be out there for all to see. Would their music even have been as celebrated if fans had to dissect every personal drama, instead of just waiting to see what the band would do next? The constant monitoring would likely have turned Oasis from rock stars they were into just another band playing to the algorithm. Without the mystery, their allure would be drastically different, in the same reason why some of the great bands today just don't seem to have that same larger-than-life feeling. They're not allowed to be human, they're told how to be famous. Let's get into record labels and creative control. Now in the 90s, Oasis were famously signed to Creation Records, an independent label that let them do whatever they wanted. And honestly, this is a big reason they were able to make such iconic albums. Today's music industry is a lot more rigid. Artists are often micromanaged, especially by large record labels that focus on how to make the most money. The thing is, Oasis made it big without all the commercial pressures. Their first two albums definitely maybe are What's the Story, Morning Glory, or pure rock and roll gold, but they didn't get there by playing it safe. Their follow-up album, Be Here Now, was massive in terms of hype, but it wasn't perfect. It was over the top, filled with excess and probably too long, but their album was the statement. They didn't care about commercial expectations. They were doing it on their own terms. Now think about it. If Oasis had tried to release something like Be Here Now today, with its long tracks, indulgent arrangements, and in-your-face attitude, it would have been an immediate industry risk. Record labels wouldn't have let it slide. They'd have wanted something polished, something that was going to guarantee streaming success. Today's industry forces bands into boxes. Songs are tailored to be radio-friendly, TikTok-friendly, playlist-ready, But Oasis didn't care about that. They were allowed to experiment because they were on an independent label, and their success wasn't bound by restrictions of a corporate machine. The kind of creative freedom doesn't exist anymore. The industry today would never tolerate the same level of unfiltered risk that Oasis represented. The spirit of punk rock, of just doing it your way and figuring out the consequences later, has been watered down in a favour of slicker, more controlled pop industry. Now let's talk about cancel culture. This is a huge factor when discussing whether Oasis could survive today. Would Liam and Noel be allowed to say what they said back then? But remember when Liam famously called Blur shit, or when Noel said that Oasis were better than the Beatles in the 90s. These comments sparked media debate, but they weren't the end of the band in today's world. However, saying something like that would have likely led to a massive online backlash, or cancelling as they call it now. The internet would have eaten them alive. Everything from their casual misogyny to their brash insults towards other artists would have been dissected, judged, and probably even cancelled by the social media mob. Imagine how much of their rebellious attitude would have been seen as toxic masculinity or problematic. And I'm not saying they shouldn't have said some of the things they said. I love Oasis and everything they've said. I'm all for it. But the point is, Oasis came from an era where rock stars weren't held to the same moral standards. They were allowed to make mistakes and allowed to be unapologetically human and allowed to express themselves without fear of the masses' wrath. Today, the pressure to perform in a safe way is overwhelming. Liam would likely be rebranded as something too controversial in today's cancel culture. The tolerance for artists being real in the way Oasis were is much thinner now. In the world obsessed with image and imperfection, Oasis' rawness could never be accepted in the same way. So, would Oasis survive in today's world? The answer, sadly, is probably no. The world they thrived in has disappeared, replaced by a more sanitized, controlled environment. So would Oasis survive in today's world? The answer, sadly, is probably no. The world they thrived in has disappeared, replaced by a more sanitized, controlled environment. Their rebellious spirit wouldn't have had the same place in the music industry today. But the truth is, Oasis were the last of their kind. They were rock stars in the true sense. They didn't just play music, they lived it. They embodied the chaos and the drama, the glory and the madness of what it meant to be a rock star. Their legacy will always live on, not just in the music they created, but in the way they represented an era. So what do you think? Do you think Oasis would survive in today's world? Or were they just a product of their time? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know what you think about the whole idea of rock stars in today's social media age. Does it even work? And if you're new to the channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss out on any more of my future content. We've got a lot more deep dives, music, analysts and discussions coming your way. I can't wait to share more with you. And a huge thank you to everyone who's already subscribed. I appreciate each and every one of you. Your support means a lot to me, and it's because of you that this channel keeps growing. If you like what we're doing here, give the video a thumbs up and feel free to share it with anyone who might enjoy this conversation. Thanks for watching.